13 years ago.
30 or 13?
1-3.
1-3, okay.
Taboola is making $100,000 a month, and I have a board meeting, and Chemi Perez is on my board. And I tell him...
Who was on your board?
Chemi Perez, the
Okay.
son of Shimon Peres.
Okay.
And I tell him, Chemi, Taboola makes $100,000 a month. I think it's about time we arrange a meeting with Sir Martin Sorrell. And he says, are you sure this is the right time? And I was like, yeah, Google should be concerned. We're coming after them. This is huge. So he sends an email to Sir Martin, and he replies, and I found that email this morning. I'm happy to. That was a reply.
Wow.
And then I make up
I had nothing else better to do.
Oh, wait, it gets better. So I make up a story that I happened to be in London, which was not a true story. And I fly to have that meeting, and I'm very nervous. You know, it's my first company. Taboola is 10 employees, $100,000 in revenue. And I walk into that meeting. And you say, why do you think I should have this meeting? And I was like, damn it. Like, is this how the rest of my career is going to look like? And you are very kind, you know.
So why are we doing this session?
Well, you're going to tell us what to do with AI. That's what
I wish I knew the answer to that. Running an agency is impossible. Tech business, super good. But agency, absolutely impossible. It's like, you know, how the IDF operates, I just don't know, because everybody in Israel has an opinion. You know, and we used to have a meeting of the agencies, like Mediacom or whatever it was there. You know, you'd have a meeting and you decide on the way forward, and before you left the room, you had 25 different opinions.
Of course.
It was impossible.
Welcome to my life, you know. you can imagine
700, did you say?
Yeah, you can imagine
Wait.
management meetings. You know, we're basically here to serve, and it's controlled chaos most of the time. But you know, it's like, you know, it's like I married a Polish woman, so most of my life she complains about things I should have done better, which is like the Israeli culture. You know, we can always do better, but we innovate, we change, we ask weird questions, and good things come out of it. I asked ChatGPT to create a slogan for Sir Martin Sorrell.
You used the wrong one. You should have been on Gemini, not ChatGPT.
Well, we can get into that as well. I have opinions. The response was the vision to disrupt, the drive to dominate, and the relentless pursuit of what's next. How do you feel about this slogan?
It's not bad. When you get knighted, you have to you choose a shield and a motto. And so I went along to the College of Heraldry, and the Herald at Arms, the guy who ran it, designed my shield, which actually has a Russian bear on it, because I think it's actually Ukrainian origins, and so you put a Russian bear on it, which was actually probably prophetic. But the motto is persistence, or persistentia et celeritate, which is Latin, I think, for persistence and speed. So I think I actually prefer that.
All right, you heard it here. So you said in the past, this is all about quoting things, either you said or Gen AI machines said about you. So you said in the past, in 2023, it's going to be the year of wow, 2024, the year of how, and 2025,
now.
The year of now. We are in 2025. We're in the now. There's so much going on with AI. Meta is striking deals with nuclear, factories to preserve energy for the next 20 years. What do you think? Where are we in the rise of AI and advertising?
Well, I wish it was now. I think clients are tinkering still. So, you know, if I have another client that says, can I do a workshop, an audit, a test? You know, it's really frustrating. And the only company, and I still believe this to be the case, that we have found, maybe us rather than anything else, is General Motors. General Motors, Norm de Greve, who is are we off the record or on the record? Is there any member of the press?
We're a public company, so I hope we're off the record.
Okay, we're off the record.
Who knows?
So I'm assuming we're off the record. But anyway, nothing I'm going to say I wouldn't mind at the end of the day being outside. So Norm de Greve is an analytical COO. He's actually an ex-Publicis executive. And he has created a new model at General Motors marketing model with upper funnel strategic agencies covering the 4 brands. So you've got GMC, Buick, Chevrolet, Cadillac. And we are the foundational agency under the 4 strategic agencies who happen to be small creative agencies because he believes that the whole coast cannot provide, whether that's right or wrong. The open model that WPP has is the opposite end of the spectrum with Coca-Cola. So you've got sort of 2 models operating, the Coca-Cola one, if you like, and the General Motors one. And Norm is really interesting because, so for example, instead of coming to Cannes, he's at Le Mans because Cadillac are sponsoring a Le Mans 24-hour team and they're going into F1 next year. But the point of the story is rather than have his face on the front page of Campaign or Adweek, what he's doing is trying to create analytically the best model. So he has upper funnel strategic agencies, ourselves Monks as the foundational agency, and we create, produce, distribute the content, and personalization at scale, basically at super scale, using first-party data and signals from the platforms to develop a marketing program. And the foundation to it is the basic driver is the price competition that they're going to have from the Chinese EVs. And AVs. So if BYD can produce a car, which they can for $10,000, an EV or an AV with God's Eye for $10,000. Last week they announced another EV at $25,000. This means that he knows that at some point in time, Mary Barra, Chairman and CEO, and Mark Roos, who runs the car division, are going to come to him and say, you're going to have to limit your media because we're going to have to take our costs down. So what he's doing is trying to create the most effective and most efficient marketing machine that he can dream up and implement at scale. And I think you see that in 2 industries. It's also in the work we do for BMW in Europe. And the other sector where we've seen this, where you've got price competition and tech competition, is financial services. So the banks, the retail branch-driven banks are going to come under, well, they already are under huge pressure from a new bank in Brazil, for example, a fintech platform. Everybody in this room knows how difficult it is to move an account, close an account, open an account. It's a nightmare. The know your customer and all that stuff that causes problems. So new bank is a much more efficient way of generating business, and the branch banks are going to have exactly the same problem. So the CMO of Santander, for example, knows that at some point in time, they're making all their money in Mexico and Brazil, not in Europe. In fact, they sold off their Polish bank just recently. And so they're having to really think about how they create costs. They have to lower their create costs as a proportion of the media.
But how can you use AI to create value such that you don't have to? I mean, this is an efficiency play, but
look, welcome to the real world. We started the conversation around Israel and Iran. 3 major problems: U.S., China, Russia, Ukraine, and Iran. And on top of that, tariffs. So what do we think is going to happen? Well, who knows, but give you a view. With tariffs, let's assume for a minute that we sort out the level of tariffs, and life is never going to go back to before April the 2nd at 9 p.m. in the Rose Garden in the White House. So we've got a level of tariffs that we haven't had for 100 years. President Trump, right or wrong, believes, and Scott Bessent and others believe, and Howard Lutnick believe, apparently, that tariffs, it's a one-time tax. It's going to lower growth. It's going to raise prices, and inflation will be more stubborn, and interest rates will be higher than they were before. In that environment, 2 things are important. One is picking your geographies. So where you grow is my view is North and South America, the Middle East, and Asia are the focal points. Africa is too volatile. Europe is too too much slow growth and too challenged, and it's all about, what you can do on cost. That's one thing. The second thing is being as efficient as you possibly can. And AI, the theme here in Cannes this week to me is AI going to kill the advertising industry? That's the central theme for not so much the tech companies that are represented here, but for the agencies. My own view is, from a disrupting point of view, that this is a new golden age, but it's a very different golden age to the one that we've just gone through for the last 30 or 40 years. The one holdco that seems to have adapted to it efficiently and effectively is Publicis. The rest of them are floundering, all five. Maybe Havas not so much, actually, to be fair, but they have a scale issue. But the other four really in trouble in one minute, including on So essentially, AI is going to do a couple of things. Firstly, it's going to help on that geographical choice, and secondly, it's about efficiency.
So when you think about the real tangible value of real life tangible value from AI, if you had to pick the most impactful thing you've seen, so beyond the fad of like everyone is saying AI now, like they're drinking water and drinking coffee, just like everyone is in AI. But what is one tangible thing?
Okay, so the biggest thing so far has been copywriting and visualization, compressing the time it takes to produce films. You may have seen the Puma film that we put out a few months ago. We've done some to date secret work for clients I've mentioned around AI, where we basically created 30-second TV commercials, which instead of costing millions of dollars and taking months to make, literally take days and a couple of $100,000. That's huge for the industry. I mean, people here show these films, and the procurement departments of the clients are saying, if it's not going to take you 2 months, why are you charging us millions of dollars? So it's a complete change, and for GM, we charge on the basis of a retainer for our FTEs, our full-time employees, and asset use. So output-based pricing is going to be critical. And that's a model that doesn't work. I remember, you just reminded me, I did this interview with Campaign, the editor of Campaign in Singapore. I came off the stage and a guy I used to know at WPP came up to me and said, I have a real problem. I said, what's that? He said, well, I have 18 people who report to me. They work Monday through Friday with AI, and I don't know what it was he did. He said, instead of working 24/7 for a couple of weeks, these people on Thursday at 10 o'clock is what he said. They can switch a switch, I don't know why, and they can do all their work. But he said, I have no incentive to do it. Firstly, I'm paid by the client on the basis of this time.
Yeah.
And secondly, I'm paid more money for managing more people. So if you think about the model, it's an antiquated model and it has to shift. So the first area is copywriting and visualization. The second area where we've seen huge change already is personalization at scale, what we call orchestration, which is the foundational agency model with GM. We're taking the ideas, the big strategic ideas, we're converting them into assets at scale using data and the signals from the platforms, from the 6 major platforms around the world, 3 Western, 3 Eastern, and we're deploying them. Those are the 2 areas. Media planning and buying, where you're sort of heavily focused, is just starting. There are 250,000 people about employed in media planning and buying. There aren't going to be 250,000 people employed in 2 or 3 years' time. It will be a huge change. The other 2 areas are general efficiency, so like the joint venture we have with AWS and Adobe and NVIDIA around outside broadcasting, where we've reduced the cost of outside broadcasting by 80 or 90% using AI and cloud. And the final area is, which I think is the most exciting, which is democratization of knowledge. So Jensen Huang has 51 direct reports. So how does he manage that? If you went to McKinsey, they would say 12 maximum. The BCG, 12 maximum. And he does it by disseminating knowledge inside the company, so everybody knows, depending on your levels in the company, you have more and more access than others. But people basically know what's going on. People in our industry and our clients control their silo by controlling information. In my view, that goes with AI. So Jensen doesn't do apparently one-to-ones.
Yeah.
Or not many. He basically sets KPIs for people there. So I think that fifth area is the most powerful. That's, we have 900 people working on Google across the world. If we can, for example, here, if we can feed into our Google LLM all the knowledge that we glean, we probably got about, I would say, 5, 6, 7 meetings, major meetings with Google here this week. If we can feed in all the knowledge we get from that to all the people that work on Google, that's a huge gain. Historically, people controlled that. Your position in the company was determined by the silo that you controlled. That's going to go up, in my view.
It's culturally, a lot of times people don't change unless they have to. And something radical has to happen. Otherwise, you just keep doing what you're doing. You're making the money you're making. You're not. I see it all the time. Even for us, when we're a tech company, a lot of times, change is a very hard thing to do. Mark Zuckerberg said that on the Wall Street Journal that AI will replace all agencies. Do you think he is option one?
Did he actually say that?
I think
I think you're paraphrasing what he said,
which is fair.
For me, the guy who said the most devastating thing was Sam Altman when he said 95% of the people in agencies are going to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
Directionally, I think he's right. I don't know whether the 95% is right or not. Mark didn't say that actually. What he's, and we have to back up for a minute. I mean, the lack of analytical comment by journalists and analysts is cringe-making. So the CFO of Meta, when Mark reported on his fourth quarter earnings, so about February, you can go back, I think it's cached somewhere, and you can listen to what she says, or you can watch the text of it. And what she said was, Meta did 150 billion of ad revenues last year, roughly. And of that 150 billion, she said 17 billion was through Advantage Plus. And the exit rate in Q4 was about 19 billion. That's a bit higher in Q4. So about 10%, a little bit more of Meta's ad revenues was going through Advantage Plus already. Mm-hmm. You have to remember that 70% of Meta's ad revenues come from small and medium-sized businesses, which, to be fair, the holdcos and ourselves, we're probably a little bit different because we operate a little bit more at the small and medium-sized end. But basically, it's not our market.
Right.
Google doesn't give a number. Meta used to give the number of accounts. When Sheryl Sandberg was there, she used to give the number of accounts that were small and medium-sized businesses. They don't do that anymore. We guess that Google and Amazon, Google does 250 billion and Amazon does 60 billion. We guess that 70% of their revenues come from small and medium-sized businesses. What Mark said about Advantage Plus some form of content end-to-end, so content and planning and buying, which is the model that we've been talking about for 5-6 years. We think that's the way it's going to go. And we will become validators for that. I think it's naive to believe that Meta will not expand its remit from small and medium-sized to enterprise. But Mark only controls 15% of the market, it's $1 trillion, or 20%, 15 out of 700 billion, 150 out of 700 billion of the digital market. Right. So there's another 85% or another 80% or 75% that he doesn't control. You wouldn't go to Rupert Murdoch today and say, invest all my money for me in advertising. You won't do it with Mark, with all due respect, and his algorithm. You'll need somebody to verify the validity of his algorithm. So we will become validators, okay? We will also advise clients on a consultative basis on their transformation. That's the shift in the model, in my view. So our view is, those 6 platforms, the 3 Western, so Alphabet, Meta, Amazon, Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance. In the West, it's something like 50% of the total market and 70% of the digital market is controlled by the 4 Western platforms, the 3 big Westerns plus TikTok outside China. And of course, inside China, Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance have total control, basically. We are going to have to validate their performance. That's what we have to do.
But my question was, is Mark Zuckerberg delusional? That was I was going.
It's not delusional.
I just want for the reference.
He's not delusional, but and listen, it's obviously in his interest,
of course,
to try and monopolize the market. My point is, he's 15% of the market, and you're not going to go. If you're a client, you're not going to go and say, Mark, invest it for me.
Yeah.
You're going to say to an independent third party, what should I do? Is the algorithm, what the algorithm is spitting out, is it right?
That makes sense. I agree with that completely.
Thank God for that.
I know. I mean, imagine I disagreed on stage with
Oy vey. With an Israeli. Yes.
Yeah. Because I would have so many other complaints coming up. But in the spirit of peace, we've for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been from pandemic, recession, inflation. What else do we have? We have wars, terror. Like it's not stopping. And my sense of the market is that if you're a client and there's volatility in the market, you're not sure what's going to happen, you lean in more to understand how is your money being spent and what's the value you're getting. Like more performance, more outcome, less.
No, I agree with that. So I think you could paraphrase it to clients have become much more short term. And the way I think about it is, if you're a listed company, you have quarterly earnings. I remember there was a CMO of a major financial services company who said to me last year, our client had moved from North America as CEO to CEO global. And this is a company that spends a lot of money on so-called upper funnel sponsorship and the like. And the CEO walks into the CMO's office in his first month and says,
what the fuck is this?
No, not quite like that. He basically says, a little bit less direct. He says, look, why are we spending all this stuff on upper funnel? All this sponsorship stuff. And, I have to go in front of analysts every quarter and tell them what, my top line growth is and what my margins are. So why are we bothering? And I think that's one element. The other element is, in a fragmented world where there is all the volatility, not just wars, but, I think globalization is not over, but it's not what it was when Ted Levitt wrote about it first in 1983 in the Harvard Business Review. So I think that's changed, and therefore that fragmentation is going to drive people into being much more short term. Now, my dad said to me, find an industry you enjoy, find a company in it that you enjoy, and then, if it's fun, carry on doing that for the rest of your life. Life is not like that anymore. Here it can, like this morning, I met with somebody who had been at Apple, left Apple, and started a major startup, and will sell that startup and start another startup. And there's a whole host of people that you meet who at the age of 35 or 40 have done 2 or 3. So continual reinvention has become, I think consumers have become like that. I think they become much more short term in their thinking. The other thing is, beyond the listed sector, private equity probably accounts for about 15 to 20% of the economy in the US and the UK, and their market share is increasing because they do a higher proportion of the deals. So, they're increasing their penetration. What's their hold period? The hold period is 5 years, 4 years, 5 years. So they are short term in their thinking. if you follow Naguib Sawiris, he wrote a scathing article or interview in the FT recently. Vanity Fair also ran a story this week about 4 companies that had been, I'm going to say destroyed, certainly been crippled by private equity's focus on cost and not strategic change. Now, you can argue one way or the other. There will be people in the private equity industry who say they aren't short term, but I think you basically are very short term.
I have so many questions, but I think we're running out of time. So I'll ask two questions I can do. So actually, it's not on my questions, but I'm curious about your answer now because of what you said. So if TV, which is in the US about $100 billion a year, it's a big screen. So for advertisers, that primarily means, top of the funnel, because rarely do you see an ad, scan a barcode, and open an account, like you would on a Meta or Search or us. What happens to that industry in a world where performance advertising matters more? Well, what happens?
So we got the answer is, last year our clients spent in total $1 trillion, ad spending. 700 billion of that was digital, and it was growing at 10 to 15% and will continue to do so. The other 300 billion is traditional and it was going backwards. So it was falling by anywhere between, let's say, 0 to 15%. And you were at the lower end of that, 0 to 5% or 0 to 10% if you had live sport. If we didn't have live sport, you were cooked, right? You were down by 10 or 15%. That is going to continue this year. The problems that Comcast have, and the split at Comcast, they do their deal. 2 or 3 years later, they're splitting the company. David Zaslav does his Warner WBB deal. A year, 2 years later, he's splitting the company. Shari Redstone is trying to, regulator Willie, trying to sell Paramount, merge Paramount with Ellison. The travails of the conventional media are huge. And, Rupert Murdoch was, give him credit, was the first person to see that, because we sold basically his traditional assets into Disney, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And Iger had to come back to rescue the company. So I think they're cooked. And the proportion of digital is 70%, it's 700 billion. And I think that proportion is going to be 80% by 2030. And then ultimately you won't be able to differentiate between digital and anything else. It'll all be digital.
So many questions. I'm wrapping up. So 13 years ago, our first date was, why do you think this is worth more time? This is like our bar mitzvah celebration.
Okay,
13 years after.
13 years old again.
This is bar mitzvah celebration here in Cannes. I hope this was worth.
It was. It's better than the bris.
Yeah. Way better.
I certainly enjoyed it more than
way better. But for the rest of us, all optimistic people who are soon going to drink cheap rosé, if you had to be in the future, looking back, and kind of like if you ever agreed to do this again with me, ever, for the life of you, what would we be talking about a year from now?
It's where I started the conversation. I think this week is about, and we'll see what people say on Friday or Thursday. Unfortunately, they don't stick around for the awards anymore. But I think they will say, is AI going to kill we should probably call it the traditional advertising industry, to which I think the answer is yes. And what you're seeing is a new industry being born. I mean, what's quite interesting is the travails of, let's put Omnicom in the publicist bucket for a minute and say it's not quite as bad as I suggest it was at the beginning, but they're still challenged. Omnicom was flat in Q1, which people miss because they go out with their gross revenue, they don't look at their net revenue, and that was flat. So it tells you a little bit about why John Wren may have done or tried to do the IPG deal. I don't think, by the way, the IPG deal is a stone cold cert. I think it's very interesting. If you use ChatGPT or Gemini, it's worth asking the question, how many deals that have a second information request from the FTC actually go through? The answer is, in their original form, is 7 to 8%. So there's a 92% probability that it will have to go through in some altered form or not at all. So it's not so-called certain.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was John Wren, having lost an espresso out of IPG, I would be having second thoughts about, unfortunately, your shareholders have approved it and so have IPG, so they all want to get it done. But I would think about nixing it. And I put them in one, but basically the holdco model, with the exception of Publicis, is under huge pressure. Mm-hmm. That's why Reed resigned. That's why Dentsu has problems outside Fortress Japan. Havas, I think, is better run. I think Yannick is a little mini Arthur in a way. You get my drift. But they have a scale issue in competing. So, and then Omnicom and IPG are going to be tangled up in their merger. AI is really putting pressure on that model. And I think out of that will come, Publicis have got a good story around data and digital and, a good structure. So they probably will gain even further as a result of the travails of the other. But for the independents, so-called like ourselves and others, huge opportunity. So I think in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, maybe we can do this on a regular basis and monitor progress. I think you're going to see the industry shift hugely. Going back to Zuckerberg, and don't forget PMax at Google. Same thing. Mm-hmm. Same. Think about Google VO and think about PMax.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
I hope you guys enjoyed it.
And good luck to Taboola.
Thank you. Thank you. 13 years after, look at us now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. All good.